It's the epic showdown of the century, the Insta360 One X versus the GoPro Fusion. Which is the better 360 camera? We'll find out by the end of this video. Firstly, we're going to talk about the cameras, then we'll move on to sample photos and videos, and finally we'll end it with a workflow comparison. So no question the One X is a much lighter camera than the Fusion. I'd say almost half as light, so that's a tick for the One X. Not that the Fusion is really that heavy, but if you're doing extreme sports and mounting it to your body, weight is a little bit of a factor. Both cameras are relatively shockproof. While they don't have replaceable lenses, the bodies are tough enough to withstand a bump or two. The Fusion is made of rubber, the One X is made of a tough plastic material. I feel like if you drop the camera on the body, the Fusion would absorb the damage a lot better. The One X has bigger lenses than the Fusion, so if you're clumsy and you're likely to drop your camera, the lens is more likely to get damaged. One X comes with an inbuilt 1/4 inch tripod mount, whereas the Fusion is the GoPro mount. How useless are the GoPro mounts? I really hate them. You have to buy an adapter to get the 1/4 inch tripod thread, and 99% of tripods come with the 1/4 inch tripod thread. Both of them have replaceable batteries and replaceable memory. The Fusion can handle up to two 256GB cards, whereas the One X handles a one 128GB card. So while technically the Fusion could shoot for longer, the One X has better file compression, so you could shoot for longer on that 128GB card. Fusion is USB-C, One X is micro USB, so the Fusion will charge slightly faster than the One X. So they both have great pros and not so great cons. To be honest, I put the design about even for now. With photo resolution, they're the same. They both shoot 18 megapixel photos. For 360 video, the Fusion shoots 5.2K and the One X shoots 5.7K, but that doesn't necessarily mean the One X is going to be better than the Fusion. There are so many factors that lead to image sharpness, and when we look at our samples, you'll see just how close it is.
So here they are. If you're like me, you're probably thinking the Fusion looks better straight out of the camera. This footage hasn't been touched. This is the natural look of each camera. The Fusion has better contrast and colors straight away, whereas the One X looks a little bit flat. The dynamic range is about even with both cameras. You can notice this both in the sky and the buildings on the right hand side. This is a super high contrast situation. I shot this at sunset and I think both of them are doing really good. When I color correct the footage, they're both looking good again. I'd be happy using either of these images. The only thing that really stands out to me is the color accuracy. If you look at the GoPro Fusion, these are the colors I was actually seeing with my eye. With the One X, the yellow in the window and the blue in the sky is just a bit off. I did try fixing this with color correction, but I wasn't really able to get those accurate colors. Now let's look at sharpness, and when I zoom in 1000%, they're looking pretty even. I couldn't say that one is sharper than the other. Yes, the Fusion has more contrast, but that doesn't mean it's sharper. To me, these cameras are dead even for video sharpness. One feature that the One X has that the Fusion doesn't is log mode, and whether that's a good thing is to be determined. As you can see on the left, it looks super flat, and this is supposed to help you with color correction later on. After color correcting this log footage, I got them about even. It did take a while to get it right, but I'm actually really happy with the look of the One X here. I think it looks just as good as the Fusion despite having a slightly different color palette. Now for our first photo sample, and with the photos in this video, I tried to make them look as good as I possibly could using the auto exposure settings in each camera. I'm not going to go into anything too advanced like raw or manual HDR. I'm only going to be using the point and shoot settings from each camera to get the best result possible. Oops, I forgot to add labels, and here they are. What's that? Yes, it's the One X on the right hand side, not the Fusion. The One X is doing better for photos in this situation. Look at that cloud behind Arc de Triomphe and how well exposed it is compared to the left hand side. I shot this with the One X's auto HDR settings, and how good does it look? That dynamic range is really excellent. You might be thinking, Mr. Ben, that's not fair. You can't use HDR for one and not the other. Well, one has HDR and not the other. So it's only fair that I use it because this is an accurate representation of what you will get if you shoot with the One X. And after I color correct, it evens things up again. Both colors and contrast and dynamic range are looking excellent. The highlights are better with One X, and I found consistently it performs better than the Fusion in bright sunlight for photos. Sharpness, however, is a different story. When I zoom into 1000%, the Fusion is noticeably sharper than One X. Both cameras are 18 megapixels, and this is why I always say you shouldn't obsess over resolution, because because sharpness can be very different to what the numbers may suggest. Here's our next photo shot outside Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and this moment was absolutely magical. The sky looked amazing, there was such a strong sense of atmosphere, and as you can see, the Fusion did a better job in this specific lighting situation. Even with HDR of the One X, it still wasn't able to capture the horizon as good as the Fusion. After color correcting, they're both looking stunning, but the Fusion clearly still has the edge in this low-ish light situation. Taking it to proper low light now, and here I am sitting next to the pyramid at the Louvre, and this first image is straight out of the camera. We have better colors and contrast on the left hand side. It's looking a little bit flat and dark on the right. After color correcting, the exposure is looking more even, however there's a lot of noticeable grain with the One X photo which you don't see with the Fusion. This is something I've always liked about the Fusion, is it's very rare that you ever see grain at night time. I probably could edit it out of my One X photo, but I couldn't really be bothered. I know they are working on its low light photo capabilities, so use this as an example for what it looks like in October 2018. When I zoom in 300%, this definitely confirms that the Fusion is better in low light. However, the one redeeming quality of the One X is in the highlights. The lights behind me are so much better exposed in the One X's image. I think I'm seeing a trend emerging here. The One X performs really well in bright situations and highlights of images, whereas the Fusion is better in darker situations or shadows of images. Here's a quick video sample of the same situation, and everything I said before applies here too. The only noticeable difference being the Fusion comes out a lot bluer than the One X. Here they are color corrected, the Fusion still wins, but I'd say both are usable. Both cameras have 6-axis stabilization, and when putting them side by side while strolling the Champs-Élysées, I can't really tell the difference. While this is far from an extreme sports situation, I've noticed both cameras are industry leading in terms of their stabilization. Even when I speed it up to 1000%, they're both still buttery smooth. I can't tell the difference. Can you? Finally, let's do a slow motion comparison. Both cameras are 3K, the One X shoots 100 FPS, and the Fusion shoots 60 FPS. In both situations, I've slowed them down to 100 FPS, and the difference is night and day. On the left, it looks like actual slow motion. When you see the wheels of the tires, they're just spinning so smoothly. On the right, it's jittery and jarring and doesn't look like real slow motion, which is so funny because when the Fusion was first advertised, they had some amazing slow motion shots in their promo videos, but these were clearly heavily post-processed and not achievable for the average user. With the One X, they're actually delivering on their slow-mo promise. I just did this in Premiere in 2 seconds, and you can also do it in the app as well.
I've always said it that Insta360 have made the best apps for 360 camera, and this situation is no different. Their app is amazing, it's so easy to use. You can download 5.7K video in seconds. The Fusion app is a lot less developed. You have to use the main GoPro app, and it's not really as 360 friendly as the One X app. Both of them allow you to do overcapture, but with the Fusion, you have to hold your finger down and move your phone physically to get your overcapture. There's no automatic controls where you can set viewpoints and have them smoothly transition from one to the other. With One X, you can add as many points as you want. There are so many different ways you can stabilize, reorient your footage, and you can do it in minutes. It makes a mobile workflow for reframing totally possible, whereas with the Fusion, there's no way I would ever use overcapture other than with photos. So you need to ask yourself, do I prefer a mobile reframing workflow or a computer one? If it's computer, the workflow will be exactly the same for both of these cameras. You download and stitch the footage, and then you'll reframe your footage in whichever program you most like using. Where the desktop workflows differ massively is the rendering and stitching time. With the Fusion, we all know it, it's a nightmare. It takes so long to process your footage, and you need a super fast computer, which most people don't have. With the One X, you can use a much more basic computer to render your footage, and it will do it much faster. People have told me they've spent days rendering Fusion footage just to get 2 minutes of video, whereas with the One X, I've never waited any longer than about half an hour. If you have a super fast computer like mine with 64 gigabytes of RAM and an 8GB graphics card, it doesn't matter which of these cameras you own, it will do it without issue. But if your computer has lower specs in terms of your graphics card and your RAM, then the One X is going to be a much faster option. Clearly, the One X is made for beginners to intermediates, whereas the Fusion is more for intermediates, and this is reflected in the workflow. The One X workflow is so much faster than the Fusion's, and who doesn't want a faster workflow? We don't want to be sitting around waiting for our footage to stitch over 6 hours. We want it instantly. We want to do it on our phones, and that's why the Insta360 One X is the perfect camera for workflow. Another massive factor to consider in this comparison is the support around each of these cameras. Because GoPro have now partnered with Color, their software company, we can't expect regular updates for the Fusion in terms of firmware, in terms of software, in terms of app updates. Who knows, they may never ever update the Fusion from this point on. It's an amazing camera already, don't get me wrong, but in terms of future updates and upgrades, I wouldn't count on the Fusion getting any better at all. With the One X, however, Insta360 are known for continually updating their firmware almost on a weekly basis and making their camera better and better as time goes on. The One X already starts with so many amazing features that are available right now, so can you imagine the amazing updates they'll add to this camera, say in 3-6 months, that will make this so much better of a camera. The final thing to mention is the price. The One X is $399 at the moment, the Fusion $599. That's almost double the price. If you consider the Fusion photos and videos to be significantly better than the One X and money isn't an issue for you, then you should consider the Fusion. But if you're like me and you see them as close enough, then no question the One X is the camera to choose. So I'd be curious to know, which camera do you think is better and why? Leave a comment down in the description. You can find links to buy both of these cameras down there as well for the best price possible. Also be sure to check out my video course, A Beginner's Guide to 360 Video. If you want to learn how to get the best results possible for 360 videos with these cameras, it's really easy if you know a few simple things, and in my video course, I'll teach you all my best tips and tricks. All right, well, I've got a train to catch and photos to shoot, so I best be going.